Hi, everybody. I'm BJ. I'm the genealogy librarian at the Maine State Library. And tonight I'm going to continue my series on census records. I'm going to talk about the early 19th century censuses, which, technically it's 1790 to 1840. So we're actually going into the late 18th century, but close enough. I am not going to talk today about anything like the state censuses or anything like that. I'm going to talk about state censuses and some other things next week. And then the week after that, I'm going to talk about Canadian, UK, and Irish census records. I'm just trying to have these so that they're discrete units so that you can find what you're interested in. So some of this will have been repeated from some other things I've done, but I think it's worth doing each of these sets. So like with the Canadian, I've covered some of that as I've gone through the provincial records, but by province, but I also want to just pull out just the census information into a presentation. So the first census was done in the US the first federal census was done in 1790. It's in the Constitution. It was meant to be used to allocate congressional districts. And from one reason I've put this set together is that it does not list everybody by name. It only lists the head of the household. And then it has tick marks by age and male or female. And the exact divisions depend on the year. So I've had people tell me, oh, I haven't bothered to look for my family. It's just tick marks. How am I can't get anything more from that. And that's not a good attitude. There are a couple things right off the bat that you can tell from these censuses. One is you can locate a person where they are. And yes, it's only the head of the household, but it can at least then tell you where to look for them for other records. And particularly as you start getting people moving west, yes, instead of getting a nice high-res digital snapshot of the family the way we almost get, we get in 1930 and 40, yes, it's a fuzzy old Polaroid that's faded, but it's still a snapshot of the family, and it tells you where they are. And I'll talk a bit about why sometimes you can't take it for granted about where they are, but it at least gives you a first approximation where the family was every 10 years. The other thing it can do, and this is really important, people don't deal with this that much, but when you have a person who's the head of the household who has a relatively common name, it can rule a family out. And let me give you an example of this. When I was working as a professional genealogist, I had a client who came to me and she had a really nice family group sheet of this family. The parents had married in about 1807, and on the family group she had proceeded to have 7 sons and 5 daughters over the next 20 years. And she hadn't looked at the 1810, 1820, 1830 census for them. And I said, have you double checked? And she's like, why? I don't need to. And I said, well, let's look. Well, we never did find them in one census. We found somebody with the same name that she figured was the right family because they were in the right place. But this family never had more than 3 males and 4 females at a time, which when you have a family that should have 8 males, including the father, and 6 females, including the mother, that doesn't work. We eventually figured out that that was a different family, and that her family was actually living at one point a couple towns over with in the 1810 census, they were living with their oldest two kids with his grandmother, who was listed as a widow. And in 1830, we found them, we think, with her father. There were enough little tick marks, and we couldn't figure out other people who belong. We found the other siblings elsewhere and such. But it turned out that family, actually, she had put a couple of the kids that belonged to the smaller family that we found in with her family, but had missed a couple kids that had been in the other location where we found her with the widowed grandmother. And so we were able to use that data, as minimal as it might seem, to figure out that they weren't quite where we thought they'd be. So that's something to think about. So let me talk briefly about the format of these. From 1790 to 1820, there were no pre-printed films. The census taker, who was the U.S. Marshal with a couple assistants, used whatever paper he could find. And so you get some level of things looking different, particularly with the earlier ones where there weren't as many columns. You may actually get 2 or 3 columns on the census paper. And you'll want to make sure you're looking at the right columns to go with it. Often, because these were not pre-printed, they did not write the column headers on every page, which can be very frustrating. I'm going to show you a couple ways around that, so you don't have to just scroll back to the first page of that census taker's work. Early on, they were supposed to, what they would do is they would write the census out. They'd post a copy. Unlike the privacy there is now, they literally posted a copy in a prominent place so people could make corrections. And then they were recopied and sent to Washington, or actually sent somewhere in state where they were gathered up and sent to Washington. I'm sure all of you can picture exactly what happens with mistakes when you have hand copies of columns of little tick marks. So despite my earlier example, you do want to have some skepticism about the numbers. In 1810, the assistant marshals were specifically told that they had to visit each family, that they could not rely on hearsay to count families. And I'm guessing that that means that there were at least rumors, if not outright examples, of marshals who had just gone on their own knowledge, gone by the neighbor, asked the minister, and so on. The marshals were paid. The amount they were paid varied by state, so that they had an incentive to get this done. These censuses did take a while. A couple of these, they were looking at people, they were collecting data over a year's time. And so if you think you have found somebody who's been enumerated twice, it may be that they lived in one place and moved, and the census taker was just getting around to the new place 6 months later. It may also just be somebody with the same name. There's no way to tell easily, but keep that in mind, that that did happen. So in 1830, you do get printed schedule forms that they're then filling in. And as I've said previously, the entire history of the census is of it developing. And so at this point, let me show you, let me share my screen. This is I have a handout I'm going to put in the chat in a little bit, but this is a wonderful publication put out by the Census called Measuring America, the Decennial Census from 1790 to 2000. It's 92 pages long. You probably don't need to print it out. But this is in the handout, the link to it. But it gives you lots of details about what they asked each year, and sometimes they talk about the instructions, as you can see here, the instructions to the marshals about how to take the census. So if you're struggling, or if you're like me and just a bit of a geek about this stuff, it is definitely worth taking a look at this and to see what the instructions were. And so, it's things like, here we have, this is 1850, so the next year, but the residents of a hotel, jail, garrison, hospital, asylum, etc., should be reckoned as one family. And that's what they would have been doing. How do you define usual place of abode? So, here are the instructions from 1830 about how somebody was supposed to do that, how the marshal was supposed to do that. This is an older publication, The History and Growth of the U.S. Census, prepared for the Senate, and this one's 969 pages long, but it's got fascinating detail about the actual instructions, what was found, updates over the course of the time they were doing the census, just absolutely amazing detail. And that will also be in the handout I put up. They did, starting in 1810, ask various questions about manufacturing. The first couple years are regarded as really not that accurate, because they really didn't define this the way they did so much else. But it is interesting to see. One of the other interesting things to note is that even though Maine was still part of Massachusetts for the first couple censuses, it is split out. Although you'll find that it depends whether Kentucky, that early on was part of Virginia, is split out or not, but Maine almost always is. I find it interesting that there are 3 cotton manufacturing establishments in Maine. I'm a little surprised that there were that many. But what's interesting here, and this is one of the issues, there's only 1 listed for Georgia. And quite frankly, that makes no sense to me that there are 3 in Maine and 1 in Georgia. So there were issues with how this was collected, but it is quite interesting to see what they regarded as, so here we have spirits distilled, beer, ale, and porter brewing, and wines. And again, there's nothing listed in Maine for beer, ale, and porter being brewed. And I'm a little skeptical on that one. I get that there's no wine at that point being made in Maine, but I would have thought there'd be at least a little brewing going on, but evidently it wasn't captured. So, you get a lot of this where, it's interesting, but this is the same thing. So this is the other part of this report where it breaks it down here in Maine, and notice again, District of Maine, not State of Maine, and it's broken down by county. And as you can see, Maine does not have its full 16 counties yet at this point. And so you can see that, Washington County at this point doesn't look like it has a lot of manufacturing, which if you think about the settlement of Maine, those of you who are down in that direction, in 1810, you're not going to have a lot, you probably never ended up with a lot of mills making things in Washington County. So, that's just something to keep in mind. But, so they were beginning to do some of these statistics. But I think it's interesting that you've got the saddlery and you've got flaxseed oil, liquor, carriages, paper as one set of things. So I'm not quite sure how they, and here you have augers and bits, soap, tanneries, shoes, boots, and slippers. So some of the categories seem to be sort of randomly placed. But I thought I'd show that to you guys as, this is the real beginnings of starting to do some statistics. So this is interesting. This is actually just a straight Wikipedia article on the 1790 census. And it's looking at the state. And Vermont didn't become a state until the next year, but it was counted as, they did a census and it was counted as 1790. And so in 1790, there were 5 categories of people. You had free white males 16 years and up, free white males under 16, free white females, including the heads of the family, all other free persons, enslaved persons, the percent of the population that was enslaved, the total, and then the percentage of the US population. So you can see there are disputes about this 16 for Vermont, and that's why there are footnotes. As you can see, Maine in 1790 had 24,384 people, or men, sorry. The total was 96,540. It was 2.5% of the American population, which is actually much more than it is today. And there were slightly more males than females if you add these numbers up. What's interesting is Virginia is the most populous state at this point, with almost 20% of the population, and 40% of the population was enslaved. So Wikipedia has this for each year of the census. So if you want to go and find this, one thing that did happen, and I'll go into this in a bit later, a lot of these early census records, Georgia, New Jersey, and various other states, the records were lost early on. And so there has been some work to use tax lists and other such records as census substitutes. One of the things that's in the handout I've copied from this book that I'm going to show you. This is online. It's a wonderful book about the census. And again, the link is in the handout that I'll put up. And it gives you the census day. So let me blow this up so you can see it. And how long it took to do the census. So see 9 months, 10 months, 13, 12, 18 months, which is, you know, you can see how some people ended up counted twice or who were missed because they lived somewhere that the census taker hadn't gotten to yet, and they moved to somewhere where the census taker had already been through. But it gives you an idea of what day they were supposed to be looking for. And if we keep going here, here's a chart that I cut and pasted into the handout for you. If there's a line like this, it means it wasn't a state yet. And so you can see those were lost. Connecticut, they're all still available. Delaware just lost 1790, but 1800 and on are available. It's not known what I've heard various things about why these were lost, but they were all pretty much lost before 1830. There is a chance, you know, they mention here that some of these still exist in some courthouse basement or something. I keep hoping. I have a client I was working with for New Jersey, and we keep hoping that one of these days when a courthouse moves into a modern building that they'll find a box that's old census records that they weren't expecting. So as I said, this book has a lot of detail as well. So, and it's online, and that you'll get that in the handout. The Family Search Wiki has a fairly good overview of all of the census for the US. And as I said, I've already talked once about the non-population schedules. I'm also going to talk next week about the state censuses, and I'll probably briefly touch on things like the school censuses and the pre-1790 colonial censuses next week. But you know, it's always worth checking out the Family Search Wiki. The other thing that happens if you go into a state, and let's pick New Jersey for this, and go into the state census records, they've done a, oh, where is it? Tell me, no, I should probably show you. Uh-oh. Existing and lost censuses. Here we go. And so under existing and lost censuses, you can see, so for 1800, it's all been lost except for Cumberland County. And so if you go into each of the states, if there are lost censuses, it will tell you the details. So that's a handy thing to know. There are 2 university libraries that have really good research guides to the census. This is the libraries from the University of Missouri. And I put these in the handout as well, but they go through, and for each census, they have an overview. They've got what questions were asked. They've got the instructions for the enumerators. They have a link to, I think this is the one. This is a wonderful site. It's done by the Newberry Library in Chicago. And if I click on Maine, and click on View Interactive Map, I can click on, right now, let's pull this out a bit. If I click on a particular date after statehood, you can see how the map boundaries change. And so you can go in here and say, in 1826, what were the boundaries? And so you go back to the one before that, which is 1824, and there are the boundaries, and you'll notice Penobscot County goes all the way up, as does Somerset, and Washington goes way up as well. And then if we go down here, you can see by this point you get that, and they have a description, the effective dates, and when, and what happened as the change. So if we go back here and click here, you can see Lincoln lost a small area to Kennebec. So if you're struggling, you can go in and you'll see that there were changes in 1830, right around the time the census was being taken. So you may want to double check on the off chance one of your ancestors lived in one of these places where this county boundary changed in that time period. It's worth checking both counties just to be on the safe side. But this, as I said, this is from the Newberry Library, and it's a wonderful resource. So, and they have other things here about the census, but what we're looking under is the historical data. And it goes all the way down to the modern censuses. The other one I found that's really nice, this is the UCLA Library's research guide. And if we click on the early decennial censuses, we get this page. And again, you get the same thing with records for that, and so on. So those are really nice. These are aimed at university students, but they are nice. These LibGuides tend to have nicely organized bits that are a good place to start. And so you can see here's that map guide, and so on. Does that make sense to everybody why I wanted to show you these? So here's the Georgia Archives. They talk about what was lost. Here they have, these three are missing. And their tax lists. And so if you're looking at a state where there are lost censuses, I would double check, in addition to looking at what's available at the big genealogy websites, like Ancestry and Family Search. I would also check out the state archives and see what they have for possible census substitutes. Does that make sense? Because again, when you get people locally, they may have, you know, better resources. You know, that's evening out some these days with the internet, but at the same time, you may have things that were done pre-internet, say for Georgia, that they have online that they have not sold the rights to one of the big websites. So, you know, on the states where you're missing things, check the state archives. I already talked about that. Now, one of the other things, I went to the Family Search Wiki, and one of the categories is census forms. And if you click on this top one, you get this. And this is really handy. On one page, it's the headings for 1790 to 1860. And I've got a caveat on this. For 1830 and 40, I'm going to show you that Ancestries is better, because there was a second page on those two that they don't have here. But if you want to print out one page to have this handy, this is a good starting point. And again, this is in the handout. So you'll be able to go get it. I would say, you'll see here, if you go through here to the worksheet, you just get this one page. But if we go through to Ancestry, notice that it's got this second page of information. And so in a minute, when I show you some of these, you'll see why. And same thing here for 1830. But again, this is in the handout. It's the census forms. And you know, you can download each of these to either have just as a model or to fill out if you're looking at people. So let's take a look at some of these. And so let's take a look at Jesse Putnam and Danvers. I'm just going to go into the census lists. And let's do a couple of these. So that's interesting that they think that Asa and Jesse are the same name. But let's look at 1820. And as you can see, now this one, they do have the column heading. And then you have the people listed. And I'm guessing, and this is one reason I pulled this up, notice these are in alphabetical order, or close to it. It's only people whose names start with P on this page. I doubt people were living in the town in alphabetical order. You know, it's not like the town said, if your name starts with P, you live in this area, and if your name starts with M, you live over there. So this is obviously a copy, and you'll also, you know, and so that's something to be aware of, is that The other thing I want you to notice, and this it gets a little tricky. Let's take a look at this. And notice this column is males of 16 and under 18, and then the next one is of 16 and under 26. So if you have a case where you have, this is not two different people probably. This is probably a 16, 17, or 18-year-old male who's been duplicated. Same thing here. And then over here you have, they do ask about people engaged in agriculture, commerce, and manufacture. And so you get, looks like these are mostly people, farming with some manufacturing. And then they did not break down people of color this year, although this census taker did, one female over 14 years. So that's for 1820. And I wanted, as I said, I wanted to point out that duplication of the 16, 17, and 18-year-old males. And again, here you get this where they did break it down. So let's look elsewhere. Let's choose another state. How about Virginia? Does Virginia have 1820? So again, here they're doing their own heading, and they are, here's about the manufacture and such here, and then you get those enslaved and free people of color, and here they've got columns. And again, you still get the 16 to 18, 16 to 26. And then here they're just looking for 26 to 45 and then over 45. So let's take a look at 1830. And now in this case, you'll see you have Phillips, Guilford, Very, Dwinnell, few Putnams, because quite frankly in Danvers, the Putnams were everywhere. Guilford, Parton, Guilford, Jocelyn. So I would think that this looks like it may just be in the order they visited the families, because you do get some clusters, but you would have gotten some clusters, because it's not too surprising that Elijah Foster Jr. is living next door to Elijah Foster, because they probably just built a second house for one of them. Whether they built a little house for grandma and grandpa and the younger family moved into the big house, or if mom and dad are still there and they just built a little cottage for the newlyweds. There's no way to know from this. But again, you get this data, and you'll notice you're getting up, they've really gone from, they're still breaking down kids in 5-year increments, and then adults in 10-year increments. But don't forget to go to the second page where you have those who were enslaved, free people of color, and then these other questions about if people were not naturalized, and if they were deaf and dumb, and that divided it over under 14 years and over 14, who were blind, and so on. And so when it's all blank like this, it's hard to tell. Well, I guess they looked at this page because they totaled everybody. But it's hard to know. So let's look just for interest to see. Let's go to New York and New York County. Yeah, so here you are getting people who are not naturalized citizens being listed. I have no idea why there's 141. Let's take a look at what that is, because that, oh, it's the New York City Hospital. So, you know, they're getting, and that may well be more of what we would think of as a, you know, either closer to rehab or an insane asylum or something like that. But this is at least, you know, if you have an ancestor who is here in the 1830, and you want to see, if you find them, it is worth looking to see if they were naturalized or not. Because here you have a household of 15, and 5 of them are not naturalized. Right? So that's, and here's a household of 2 where there are 2 that are not. So these are both foreign citizens. And, you know, given the lack of records and the difficulty finding records about naturalization and immigration at this time point, I wanted to point this out because a lot of people don't think there's a second page on 1830 and 40. And this is why I encourage you. I like the one-page summary of what's on these from the Family Search Wiki, but I really like that Ancestry has the second page slots as well. And then to look at 1840, to show you one of the other bits that you'll want to see. You know, again, the first page looks very similar. People who are white, and the tally marks by age, free colored persons. Second page has people who were enslaved, people employed in the different types of agricultural manufacture. Again, you get the deaf, dumb, and blind questions. And this is the column you'll want to pay attention to as well. This is asking for veterans in this column. And there aren't any on this page, so let's. So this is on this page we have a widow, because some of the census takers included widows who were getting a pension, some didn't. And so it lists her with an exact age. Now she's in a household of 1, so if we go back a page, she should be listed, and she's not. Oh, there she is. She is listed as the head of the household. But I have seen cases where it's an uncle where it's a father-in-law, an older brother, people like that who aren't picked up as the head of the household, but are on, let's see if we can find another example. So here's one, here's a Gideon Foster, age 91. And he's in a household with 4 people. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, line 7. And he's the head of the household. But at 91, he could well have been in a son or a daughter's household and be listed there and not listed as the head of the household. Does that make sense why it's worth checking that? You know, anytime you have anyone in 1840 who is over about 50 years, it's worth looking because, as I said, some of the census takers did actually put widows there. And so, and you get people who are both Revolutionary War and War of 1812 veterans. And sometimes some of the other minor conflicts that happened before that. So it's worth looking. But yeah, that's why I, as much as I like a lot of the stuff from Family Search, the fact that they don't have that second page is a bit hard. So let me stop sharing at this point and restart my video. So have I convinced you that it is worth looking at these census records, even if it is just the tick marks? You know, even if you were skeptical before we started, I hope you're not now. Yeah, it can be frustrating to, particularly as the categories change, and to figure out, is this consistent with the previous census or the following census? And when I've had cases where there's a daughter who should have been there and isn't. I've had cases where there are 3 people in a household I can't account for. But again, particularly those early years, remember that in 1810, they had to tell the marshals to actually visit each household, which means some marshals weren't. And you may get cases where, because these took several months, you get a daughter who was living with her grandparents to help them, and she gets counted both places or neither, because both the grandparents and the parents thought that she was getting counted at the other one. It happened. And we can't tell for sure on some of these things, but I had one case where the grandfather left extra to one granddaughter because she had been the one who spent her teen years helping them before she got married. And then when she got married, the grandson-in-law moved in with them. And so they got extra, which is how I figured that one out, because the will made it clear that that's why she was getting a larger portion than her cousins, is she had done that. So it's worth, as I said, if nothing else, it's going to give you an idea of the household size and where somebody is. But there are other details you can pull out to see what there is about a family. Any questions at this point? Oh, and let me put, while you're thinking of questions, let me put the file in the chat. That's assuming I can find it. Where did I put it? There it is. Okay, so in the chat, you should see a little icon, and if you click on that, it should open up for you. And why did it not? Let me try that again. All right, you should have it there in the chat. Yeah, you may get, you know, state and county boundaries changing. As I said, they tended to pull Maine out early on, but at the same time, other places that were pulled out of other states may still, Virginia, West Virginia doesn't get separated until they become separate states. Parts of Kentucky and Tennessee were not pulled out separately. So there is some guesswork about where somebody should be. It's there on the handout. Can anybody see the handout in the chat? Okay.
Yes.
I wonder. Okay. Helen, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
It's there as far as I can tell, BJ.
Yeah.
In the chat.
Okay. I have asked. I will double check how that's going. I've asked our person who does web stuff to give me a web page to put everything up. This gives me an excuse to pester him tomorrow. And yeah, and it may be, I have not tried this from an iPad. That may be the difference. I did not actually do handouts for the previous census ones. I did for this because I wanted to make sure that you had the link to, and let me do this. I will, at least for the census forms, because I think they're very important. That's the family search, and here's the ancestry. And if you just, you can also just Google blank census forms ancestry. And they will come up as well. But as I said, I do like the one that is, even though it misses that second page, I do like the one that has the multiple years on one page. I actually have that laminated on my desk so that I can refer to it. So are you getting the links, at least those of you on an iPad? Okay, so at least that gets you the links. Those are the, I put the other things in, but these links are the ones that were the, okay, let's see. Do I know what happened in New Hampshire in 1820 in Grafton County? Not off the top of my head. I'm guessing these are cases where, in Maine, Newfield, yeah, I'm guessing that's just a case of the paper went astray. I don't know. So let me do a quick. Let's see what it says. So it looks for 1820, Grafton, part of Rockingham, and most of Strafford County are missing. And in 1800, part of Rockingham and part of Strafford are missing. So, and actually for 1800, they go by town. For 1800, there is a 1798 direct tax list for many of those towns that can be a census substitute. I don't know about Newfield, Maine. Let's take a look. What county is Newfield in? Anybody remember?
York.
Okay. Because this is just saying that for 1820, Holton and North Limerick are missing from Washington County. 1810, half of Oxford County is missing. And for 1800, York County is missing Hiram and Sanford. So I don't know about Newfield. The other thing that I should tell you is these records are at Ancestry, at Family Search, at MyHeritage, at Find My Past. And if you can't find something one place, take a look at the others in case it's a digitizing error. I wouldn't be surprised if Newfield was only a page or two. I wouldn't be surprised if that was a microfilming error. And unfortunately, as far as I know, a lot of these early ones, there's no way to get around a microfilming error. Either the originals no longer exist or the National Archives has them so locked up that nobody can see them. It's kind of like the Martha Ballard diary at the State Library that, even staff, it's in such fragile shape that even staff don't touch it. It's wrapped in every sort of archival material you could dream of and stored in our safe, and just, it's been microfilmed and transcribed, and that's what you can use. So my understanding is that for most of the census returns from early on, it's the same situation. So I don't know about Newfield, but I'm guessing that it's one of those that it's a small enough area, nobody's bothered to notice that it's not there.
Yeah, and the records burned during that big forest fire, so there's no town hall records from Newfield.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a lost cause.
Is there at least a 1798 direct tax? I think Maine participated in that. Which
really
isn't
what I want.
Yeah. Yeah, we all have cases where, there are, the
1820 was the first year he was married. And I find him there in 1830. And after that, he disappears again.
Yeah, I've got a couple of those.
His wife in 1850 is with the brother. on the same road next door to where they used to live, but he's not there.
So I'm guessing he either went west and it was a de facto divorce, or he died.
I think he might be in Boston. I
Yeah.
find somebody down there that looks very, age-wise, born in New Hampshire, which checks, and the year
Yeah.
kind of checks. But down at the customs house, and what he was doing there, where he was a farmer before, I don't know.
No idea. So anyhow, that just gives you I hope this overview has convinced you that these are worth taking a look at. So I'm going to stop the recording at this point.